Okay, everybody, it is 10 a.m. and we love to start on time. Thank you so much for being here with us for today's sub-recipient monitoring training. If this is your first time with SSF and our learning experiences, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and making time to help collectively resolve homelessness. And we come together in these trainings to help us all expand our capacity to know more and to do more so that we can serve more. Thank you. My name is Jody Weiner. I am the Learning and Development Specialist here at SSF. I will be in the background doing the things. And this morning we are joined with Kadia Hunter, Marissa Lee, as we present the rent calculation. This is part of the subrecipient monitoring trainings, training series. My apologies. I do know, I believe there's another one coming up next month as well. And as a reminder, with all of our trainings, this is recorded and closed captioned. You will get a link to the slides. A PDF has been dropped in the chat. You will get an email with a link to the slides and the recording to refer back to. Give us several days. We usually get that out. Please use the chat to interact with our trainers, and we love a good emoji. You're welcome to use that as well. If you have specific questions, please use the Q&A function so that we can capture all that information and make sure that we answer them appropriately. We will have a Q&A section at the very end of the training. And of course, we always close out with a thank you and please complete our survey. So with that, I will hand it off. No, before I hand it off, we're going to learn today about the review rent calculation tools and participant rent requirements. You'll get details on income exclusions and further increase your understanding of requirements to ensure compliance. Now I get to hand it off to Marissa. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Jody. And hi, everybody. Welcome in. We're going to start off by talking about core rental terms. This section goes over 5 key rental terms we use across COC programs. And they're what we look at when reviewing rent calculations, making sure client payments and subsidies are accurate and compliant. Next slide, please. Programs these terms apply to. These terms apply across PSH, RRH, and TH, whether the project uses tenant-based, sponsor-based, or project-based assistance. They also apply across leasing and rental assistance budget lines. So no matter how the program is structured, the rules around rent stay the same. Next slide, please. The 5 terms we'll cover are unit rent, tenant rent, rent reasonableness, fair market rent, and utility allowance. These are the core pieces we're checking when reviewing rent calcs, and they show up across almost every file. So, next slide, please. The unit rent is the full cost of the unit. That includes contract rent and, if applicable, the utility allowance. So if a tenant pays utilities, that gets added to the rent amount. This total is used to check both fair market rent and rent reasonableness. Next slide, please. Tenant rent is what the participant pays based on income. So in rental assistance projects, it's called tenant rent. And in leasing projects, it's called occupancy charge. And the amount is calculated the same. It just depends on the funding source. This needs to match what's documented in the rent calc and updated if income changes. Next slide, please. Rent reasonableness. This confirms the rent is reasonable for the unit type, features, and location. It's required at move-in, lease renewal, rent increases, and if fair market rent drops more than 5%. If a unit is found not to be reasonable, it is not eligible to be paid with HUD funds. SSF has a required calculator unless your project has a written approval to use something else. Missing this documentation is one of the most common file issues that we see. So definitely something to pay attention to. Next slide, please. Fair market rent. Permanent housing is community-based housing without designated length of stay. FMR is set by HUD and includes both rent and utilities. It updates annually on October 1st and varies by location and bedroom size. For leasing projects, the rent must stay within FMR. For rental assistance, it can go above FMR if the rent is still reasonable. So it has to always be reasonable. We use it to confirm that the full rent amount, including utilities, is appropriate. And thank you. Next slide, please. And then we are jumping in rent calculation.
All right, so we're gonna go into the actual process for calculating rent. Next slide, please. So here are the steps to determining rent. You'll want to determine the method and then who is in the household. So the composition, like adults, dependents, students, and then calculate the annual household income, determine the utility allowance, and then determine the payment amount. I'm gonna just cover the first step and then we'll go into each step in more detail. So the next slide, please, will be the first step. And okay, so determining the method. So depending on what type of project you are, you're going to use a different method. So if you're a permanent supportive housing project, whether it's rental assistance or leasing funded, you will charge tenant rent. And you'll follow the requirements to calculate and adjust the income that we're going to go over today. If the tenant does not have income, you are able to pay the full amount of rent. If you're a rapid rehousing project, it's a little more flexible. So effective January 2025, rapid rehousing projects now have the ability to take a progressive engagement approach. So this is where the case manager works closely with the household to tailor the rent payment plan based on household size, income, any relevant kind of issues that affect the household's budget. And prior to implementing that, you will want to document the policy for the approach. We've gotten some requests to kind of come up with one that projects can use, and we're working on one, but we haven't developed one fully yet. So today is going to be really focused on our PSH projects and the tool that we're using for that. Next slide. So the next step in determining the method really goes into calculating the rent. So participants must pay the highest of the following listed, the three listed here. So 30% of monthly adjusted income, 10% of the monthly gross income, or welfare rent, which is usually, it's not, it's now a legacy term, so it's not currently used, and it's only really applicable in very few cases. And again, this kind of application applies to our PSH programs. And then on the right here, you'll just see kind of an example of how we're choosing the highest rent of the three. And we'll go into kind of how the tool actually does that. Next slide. So another important component to determining rent before we go into the actual tool is when to do so. So you'll want to calculate rent always at initial lease up and then annually thereafter to be effective every time at the move-in anniversary date. Interims are allowed as needed. So if, for example, a participant loses their job and their income changes, you're able to recertify their rent portion. It's important to note that participants should or must always report income changes substantial changes. So if it's like a few dollars a month, it's not necessary, but substantial changes. And then rent occupancy charge will be recalculated. And then you'll want to reflect that in their HMS profile. Next slide. Something we don't often talk about is notifying the participant of the recertification. I'm sure most of you already do it, but just kind of laying it out here that there should be a general timeline of how you notify your participants, giving them advance notice of a recertification. So at the time that you notify them, which should be given, give or take about 3 months before their next recertification date, the annual date, you will give them that amount of time, and then the participant will gather verification of their income or any proof of income in their checking account and provide you with all the necessary information about 45 days after they're notified. And then from there, you're able to review and determine rent. If the rent will increase or decrease, you should give them at least 1 month's advance notice. And then the rent will go into effect after that 90-day mark of the notification. So about a 3-month advance notice. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to go into the tool. Next slide. So again, here are the steps for determining rent. We just covered determining the method, and the next steps are going to include who should go in the household, annual income, utility allowances. These next section will include a lot of information, but they're really there to provide you with the reference after the presentation's over, so you have the slides. But before we go into the next steps, I'm going to show you the tool, which will actually help you do all these things, so you don't need to do all these things manually. We do have a tool. Most of you are already using it, but we have made some updates as of May 2025. So make sure you have the most recent version, and it is available in the portal too. Next slide, please. So in this section here, I'm not going to go into the details, just kind of showing you screenshots of the tool and how it kind of functions. So in the first section, you'll have kind of different types of income that you can choose from. And this is where you will input the amount of annual income or monthly, and it'll, you'll put in the monthly income and it'll auto calculate the annual amounts. And then next slide, please. So this is just a continuation of the income section of you inputting the amounts for your participant. As you can see, we also updated some sections in red. For example, the student financial aid. We've linked a current worksheet that you can use to calculate student aid amounts. So after you input your monthly amounts, you'll get the summed annual amount. Next slide. And then you'll go into, again, we have some resources linked here. We'll be covering assets in our next upcoming training. Next slide, please. So this section, after you add in your income for the household, you'll want to then factor in any deductions. So this section will help you as you enter in, for example, the number of dependents. It will auto calculate the amount that the deduction that will apply to the household income, and it will auto sum that at the bottom. So you just need to add in the applicable numbers or amounts, and the yellow boxes are the only boxes that you can input any information into. Next slide, please. So after you've added your income totals, your deductions, then you'll want to calculate your utility allowances. Again, you don't have to manually calculate these. We have tabs that follow the tool, and depending on the type of utility, utility that the participant receives, whether it's gas or electric, you would enter in, and based on the unit type and size, you would enter in the amounts listed here that apply, and then it will auto sum the amount onto the rent calculation form. So again, these slides, these upcoming slides that we'll show you are going to go into the actual details. And so they'll have all of the information I just covered, but we wanted to give you a brief run through of the tool so that you have that in the back of your head, knowing that you don't have to do all this manually. So I'm going to hand it over to Kadia to go over the actual calculation of income.
Okie dokie. Income calculation. You can go to the next slide. So we're going to dive into the basics of income calculation. This is the foundation for determining eligibility and rent and housing programs. So first we'll need to figure out household composition, who's actually living there, and counts towards the family units. Then we would apply the annual income definition, deciding whose income to include, what types like wages or asset income, and how to calculate it all. Finally, we adjust that income by subtracting allowable deductions to get to the adjusted income figure. Just want you guys to kind of think of it like building a puzzle. You can't skip steps or the whole picture kind of falls apart. So for example, if someone has medical expenses, those deductions can make a big difference in what a family pays. This process ensures fairness based on HUD guidelines. We got a lot of details coming up, so stay with me so we can see how Hotma shakes things up. Go to the next slide, please. All right, so building on that overview, let's talk about determining household income under the latest changes. This is all based on HUD's training from the U.S. Housing Act of 1937 revisions, specifically sections 102 and 104, which were updated through HOTMA. Section 102 tweaks how we do income reviews for public housing and the Housing Choice Voucher programs, making sure we're accurate and up to date. Then there's Section 104, which put caps on assets for families in these programs. Why does this matter, you might ask? Well, it prevents folks with too many assets from qualifying, keeping resources for those who need them most. Imagine a family's significant savings. They might not get the same assistance. These changes aim to modernize things, and we'll see how it plays out in practice. But let's keep going to what HOTMA really means. Next slide, please. So what is HOTMA all about? It's the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act of 2016, and it's bringing some big shifts to income calculation. We're seeing a new broader definition of income with specific exceptions listed out. There's no more gray areas. The earned income disregard is being phased out, which means certain income protections are going away over time. Deductions are changing too, like health and medical expenses, now deductible only 10% of annual income. This change will be phased in over 2 years. Plus, there are hardship exemptions for things like childcare or medical costs. Picture a single parent juggling work and their kids. These exemptions could be a lifeline. Overall, this modernizes the systems to reflect today's realities. We'll break down the income definition next, so just stay with me. Next slide, please. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the income definition under 24 CFR 5.609A. Basically, it includes all amounts not specifically excluded from any source for household members 18 or older or head of household or their spouses, regardless of their age. Plus unearned income for minors, actual income from assets, and even imputed returns on assets over $50,000. A little side note, foster children and adults aren't counted as family members anymore. They don't affect household size for income limits, and we treat them like living aids, excluding their income and assets. This is a HOTMA change to streamline things. For instance, if a family takes in a foster kid, it won't bump their income calculation unfairly. Makes sense, right? Next slide, please. I know this slide on rent reasonableness might seem a bit out of place here in this section, but it's crucial to tie it in because it affects overall affordability. The rule is clear. You have to run this test before any lease is signed, then review and document it every year. And please don't forget, you need to have a solid written policies on how to compare rents with similar units in the area. The big reason is it protects families from inflated rents and keeps our programs in line with regulations. For example, if a unit's rent is way above market, it could flag issues. Odd spot or not, it's vital safeguard in the whole eligibility puzzle. Let's get back to income details. Or does anybody have any questions so far? Yeah, just because I know it's like a lot. Can't really see the chat, but all right. Next slide. All right, let's define some key terms that'll help us navigate income calculation. Still kind of the same, but just to go over them. Earned income covers wages, tips, salaries, and self-employment. Net income. A day laborer is someone hired one day at a time, no guarantees for more work. And an independent contractor qualifies under IRS rules and pays self-employment taxes. And a seasonal worker, those are the folks that are hired for short-term gigs that repeat yearly, like harvest season jobs. Those distinctions matter because they affect how we count income, especially under HOTMA. Say you're a seasonal worker, we wouldn't project that income year-round if it's not ongoing. This keeps calculations fair and accurate. HUD guidance on family versus household members post-HOTMA. Live-in aides and fosters are households, but not family for income purposes. So let's build on this with income inclusions next. Next slide, please. All right, shifting to what actually gets included in income. According to HUD, family members count for income limits, while household includes all occupants like live-in aides or fosters who don't contribute to income now. A change from pre-HOTMA. Inclusions cover things like wages, benefits, and assets, but we'll detail exclusions soon. HOTMA flips some yes to no on certain items, making it broader, but with carve-outs. For a family, this means we're counting more comprehensively, but excluding non-essentials. Imagine excluding foster care payments. It lightens the load. This ties into adjustment factors coming up. Any thoughts? Okay, great. Let's talk about those annual adjustments. Next slide. All right, let's talk about these adjustment factors. They're really the dynamic part of HOTMA that keeps everything up to date with the real world. It has introduced an annual inflationary adjustment factor, meaning the number we use for income calculations will change every single year to account for these things like rising costs. They'll publish the updated rates in a notice every September, and we've got until January to put them into practice. This applies to a bunch of key areas: the imputed asset income thresholds for including non-necessary personal property, assets, self-certification limits, deductions for elderly households, independents, limits on earned income for full-time adult students. There'll be caps on adoption assistant payments, and even the passbook saving rate. Why does this matter? Well, imagine inflation driving up living expenses. If deductions don't adjust, families could end up paying more than they should. It's like giving the system a yearly tune-up to stay fair and relevant. We'll look at starting values for these under HOTMA on the next slide. Next slide. Speaking on starting point, here's what adjustment factors look like at the launch of HOTMA. Eligibility restrictions on net family assets, imputed income threshold, passbook rate, non-necessary personal property. I think it's a total of 9. Now for 2025, HUD has released updates with increases in 5 areas. The asset limitation jumps from 100,000 to 103,200. Imputed asset income threshold from $50,000 to $51,600, and the passbook rate from 0.40% to 0.45%. And there's also a self-certification threshold also to $51,600, and non-necessary personal property threshold to $51,600 too. So these changes reflect inflation adjustments to better support families. This is foundational, but let's flip to exclusions. What doesn't count? Next slide. Shifting to exclusions in 5.609B24. Remember, income generally counts unless specified otherwise. Non-reoccurring stuff from last year gets a pass if the family confirms it won't happen again, such as like short census gigs, stimulus checks, tax refunds, birthday gifts, donated goods like clothes, or big one-time asset boosts like inheritance. Plus, state Medicaid payments for in-home caregiving to support a disabled family member are completely out. Together, this sets a fair foundation. Say a family gets one-off tax refund, it stays excluded, avoiding an unfair income spike. Makes sense for real life scenarios, doesn't it? What challenges do these starting figures pose for you? Hang tight for more exclusions, because it's a lot. Next slide. Continuing our dive into exclusions, let's look at section 5.609B2 and B17. These focus on protections for vulnerable groups. Payments to help individuals with disabilities live at home are excluded. With disabilities to live at home are excluded, with no change if already in place. And they remove the requirement that they offset specific services or equipment. Any distributions from a trust principal are out. No matter the trust type, including income from principals used for minors' health costs, plus veterans aid and attendance payments under 38 USC 1521 don't count. These changes eliminate old barriers and support independence. For a family with a disabled child, trust funds for care won't count against them. It's a big relief. Next slide. Let's break down some common income exclusions in a simple way. These don't count toward a family's total. Kids' earnings under the age of 18, including fosters, payments for foster care, one-time assets boost like inheritance or insurance payouts, reimbursements for medical costs, living aid income, HUD training program funds, set-asides for disabled folks under past plans, out-of-pocket expenses, reimbursements for other programs, and small resident stipends up to $200 a month for community tasks like monitoring halls or mowing lawns. These rules avoid punishing helpful supports. For instance, a teenager's summer job won't bump up the family's income total. These carve-outs protect everyday supports and prevent overcounting. For instance, another teen's job income stays excluded so it doesn't burden the family's total. It makes the process fair for families in tough spots. There's even more in the next slide to round it out. Next slide. Okay, so with more exclusions that pop up in unique situations, I'm kind of try to keep it straightforward. The first payments from state or local job training programs or residence management trainings don't count if they're part of time limited programs with clear goals. Extra earnings over $480 for full-time students 18 and over, excluding the head or spouse. Adoption aid above $460 per child. Delayed SSI or Social Security payments. Property tax rebates and federal statute exclusions like food stamp benefits, domestic volunteer act payments, Alaska Native claim funds, certain tribal land income, low income home energy assistance, or job training partnerships act support. These guard against unfair hits from special circumstances. For a family and training program, those funds stay excluded, letting them build skills without rent hikes. Pretty thoughtful setup, isn't it? Spot anything new here? Let's look at some more on the next slide. Next. All right, where we left off, this slide dives into even more specific income exclusions, focusing on tribal, educational, and historical payments. Things like income from disposing funds of the Grand River Band of Ottawa Indians, the first 2,000 from Indian Claim Commission judgments, or tribal trust funds. Scholarships under Earned Income Tax Credit refunds since 1991, AmeriCorps living allowances, and nutrition programs like WIC. These protect culture and compensatory payments. For example, a Native American family receiving tribal judgment funds, the first $2,000 is fully excluded, preserving their heritage without income penalties. It's about respecting diverse backgrounds. How might these apply in your cases? Next, we'll zoom in on student financial aid exclusions. Shifting to student financial assistance under 24 CFR 5.609B9I and 2I, whatever. There are two main categories of exclusions to make education more accessible. First, any assistance required to be excluded by Section 479B of the Higher Education Act, all of it must be left out of income calculations. Note for HCV participants, amounts over tuition and fees aren't excluded if it's for the head, co-head, or their spouses, 23 or under, or those without dependents. We can go to the next slide. The second category is similar, but emphasizes that all such aid is fully excluded. This includes aid for actual costs like tuition, books, supplies, even for disabilities, room and board, and fees charged by higher education institutions, including reasonable housing costs off campus, if not in an assisted unit. It applies to grants or scholarships from federal, state, tribal, local governments, or an institution of higher education. Importantly, this exclusion covers both part-time and full-time students. And it's all about covering real educational expenses without counting them as income. Let's imagine a young adult getting a federal grant for books and tuition. It stays out, keeping their family stable. Why the distinction for certain household roles? It prevents abuse while supporting education. You guys have any thoughts on this or things changing? We'll still be expanding on the next slide. Next slide. EDD.
Yeah, there's a question here. Is EDD part of the exclusion?
This one is focusing on financial aid, and I don't believe EDD is part of it. Liana, do you know? I don't think it is. That wasn't one of them that we came.
I'm sorry, what is EDD?
Like unemployment assistance.
Unemployment?
Yes.
I have not seen it excluded.
Yeah, I think it's facility.
So if it is not excluded, it means that it must be included.
And we'll go over inclusions shortly. Next slide. You're welcome. Shifting gears, let's chat about Earned Income Disregard, or EID, one of HOTMA's key updates on handling increases in earned income. In short, for families who were already qualified and using it when the final rule kicks in, no adding new participants. Those families can hold on to the benefit until their 24-month clock runs out. But by January 1st, 2026, which is 2 years after full rollout, no one gets EID anymore. One exception is for families in jobs plus programs from the fiscal year 22 NOFO or earlier can keep going under their original terms. So this is going to be pushing for long-term self-reliance while grandfathering in current users. Let's picture a working parent whose income rises, they lose the disregard sooner, so rent could go up quicker under the new rules. Definitely something to plan for in your caseloads. Dive deeper with the income and income exclusion resource sheet linked here. How might this affect families they're supporting? It's a question to think about. All right, let's link everything back in the next slide. All right, so let's bring this to life with a real world comparison. Pre-HOTMA versus new rules for student financial aid using Jenny's case. Pre-HOTMA, Jenny is a 20-year-old student, applies for a unit, not on Section 8, gets financial aid for college. Since no Section 8 is involved, all her aid is excluded from income, no questions asked. Under new HOTMA, it's similar. All aid is still excluded if not on Section 8. But wait, the new rule specifies that any aid not under the Higher Education Act exceeding actual school costs must be included as income. This shows that HOTMA adds nuance to prevent over-exclusions. For Jenny, a scholarship covering extra living expenses might now count partially, affecting eligibility. It's kind of an interesting shift. How would this play out in your programs? We'll look at another example next. Next slide. Is it? Go. I can't see. Oh, thank you. Okay, so let's clarify some differences with another example. Focusing on Jean's family to show how HOTMA updates student aid rules. Under pre-HOTMA rules, Jean, a 24-year-old student, applies for a unit with her husband, Tom, and their daughter. No Section 8 involved. All her student financial aid is fully excluded from income, no exceptions. Now, under HOTMA, for non-Section 8 households like Jean's, the core exclusion remains, but there's a twist. Any part of the aid not covered by the Higher Education Act, HEA, which handles federal student aid, that goes beyond actual school costs like tuition, books, or fees, must now be counted as income. This tightens things to ensure only true educational support is excluded. For Jean, if her grant pays for extra non-school expenses, that surplus counts, possibly increasing her family's total income and rent. Do you see the shift now? It might require rechecking similar cases. If you've handled any student aid scenarios like this, might benefit to go look back at them. Next, we'll outline what's excluded versus income included under HOTMA. Next slide. Finally, let's clarify what excluded versus included in income under HOTMA for student aid. Split into 2 columns for easy reference. Excluded is federal Pell Grants, work study, teach grants, Perkins loans, higher education, tribal grants, Bureau of Indian Education Assistance, tribally controlled colleges or university grants, and WIOA employment training under Section 134. Now, included grants or scholarships exceeding actual covered costs from federal, state, tribal, local governments, private foundations, registered as a nonprofits, businesses, or higher education ensures aid helps with education without inflating income unnecessarily. For example, a Pell Grant for tuition is fully excluded, but extra from a business grant beyond cost counts. It's targeted to support how will this affect your verification process? This wraps our exclusions. Let's tie it all back into income calculation with some examples. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to put everything that we learned about student aid into practice with this example. It's a great way to see how HOTMA rules play out in real scenarios. Here's the setup. A student not on Section 8 gets $15,000 from a scholarship under the Higher Education Act, HEA, and $5,000 from a private scholarship not covered by HEA. Their actual covered school costs, like tuition, books, and fees, total $22,000. Now we're going to follow these steps to figure out what counts as income. So step one would be to subtract the HEA assistance from the actual cost, which is $22,000 minus $15,000. It's going to leave us with $7,000, still uncovered. Step two, we have to subtract that $7,000 from the non-HEA aid. $5,000 minus $7,000 gives negative $2,000. Since the total aid, $20,000, is less than cost, $22,000, nothing gets included as income. It's all excluded. This shows how HOTMA protects educational support. And think of a student scrapping by on grants. If aid falls short of cost, their family isn't hit with extra income counts. Kind of makes sense. We're going to try this on some more examples next. Next slide. So on this slide, a student who does not receive Section 8 assistance receives the following in student financial assistance: $15,000 scholarship under the HEA, $5,000 private scholarship not covered under HEA, $500 gift from Aunt Lois received twice a year, and students' actual covered cost, $18,000. Actual covered cost is $18,000. So step one, again, we're going to subtract the amount of HEA assistance from the actual covered cost. So that's $18,000 minus $15,000, which is the HEA assistance, equals $3,000. Step two, we're going to subtract the amount determined in step one from the non-HEA assistance. So $5,000 minus $3,000, step one, equals $2,000. The recurring gift from Aunt Lois is not considered student financial assistance, but will be included in income. As the student assistance is more than the actual covered cost, the excess of $2,000 must be included when determining income. Next slide. So here's one more scenario. A student who does not receive Section 8 assistance receives the following in student financial assistance: $25,000 scholarship under the HEA. Students' actual covered cost is $18,000. Since the only form of student financial assistance received is covered under the HEA, the entire amount of the above scholarship is excluded from income, even though the assistance exceeds the actual covered costs. If the household receives Section 8 assistance, follow the pre-HOTMA regulations to calculate income, if any. Next slide. So we're going to have a poll. Please answer. For a public housing participant, Title 5 HEA assistance, $26,000. Other for a public housing participant. Other student financial assistance, $5,000. Actual cover cost, $25,000. How much total student financial assistance would be excluded? It's multiple choice.
We do have some answers coming through, and we'll give it just about another 15 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll share results. Just about 50% of you have responded. Thank you for that.
Good job. This one is like, so number one was 26,000 and number two was 5,000. I believe. Trying to make sure I got it. The poll would not leave.
All right, are we done sharing here? Ready to
Yeah.
move on, Kadia? Yeah,
Oh yeah, you go to the next poll.
thank you.
So which of these would likely be reoccurring and therefore included as income? A, an outreach work for the tenure sentences, seasonal work as a snow plow driver, tax credits, D, lottery or other contest winnings.
We do have just about 10 more seconds left for the poll. 60% of you have responded. Thank you for that.
Fair. Good job. It would have been a seasonal worker as a snow plow driver. 56%. Next slide. Next poll. So this one, it's Sam received a check from his father every month. This amount should be blank from the calculation of Sam's household income. He also received an occasional monetary gift from his grandmother. This amount is blank in the income calculation. Please answer.
We've got just another 10 seconds here. And just about 60% have responded. Thank you for that. And we'll end it here.
Good job. You guys got it. 88%. It was included for the first one and excluded for the second. Next slide. And it's utility allowance. And I'm handing it back to you, Marissa.
Thank you, Kadia.
No worries.
So for utility allowance, if a tenant is paying utilities directly, a utility allowance has to be included in the rent calc. So we use the utility schedule from the local PHA in Sacramento, that's SHRA. We don't use actual bills, we use the standard chart to keep things consistent. Next slide, please. Understanding utility allowance. The utility allowance only applies to tenant paid utilities, not cable, internet, or phone. This number comes from the PHA's published schedule and is required when calculating both the unit rent and what the tenant owes. Next slide, please. Utility allowance SHRA. SHRA provides different utility schedules based on the unit type and fuel type. So a duplex will have a different allowance than an apartment, and electric heat is different from gas. Make sure that the schedule matches the unit and is current. That chart should be printed, dated, and kept in the file with the rent calc. And those are all linked here. And then those are updated every year, October 1st. Next slide, please. Sample utility allowance. This example shows a 1-bedroom duplex with electric heat, lighting, and hot water. That adds up to an $80 utility allowance. And then that $80 gets added to the unit rent when checking FMR and rent reasonableness. It's also subtracted from the tenant's rent portion in the calculation. Next slide, please. Impact of utility allowance on subsidy payment. Utility allowance changes the amount the tenant pays and the amount the program pays. If a tenant rent portion is $150 and they have an $80 utility allowance, they only pay $70 toward rent. The program subsidy increases to cover the difference. If the utility allowance is incorrect or missing, the rent calc will be off. So like Kadia said, it's like all pieces in a puzzle. We can't miss a piece or the whole thing gets messed up. So next slide, please. Paying the utility allowance. If the tenant's rent portion is less than the utility allowance, a utility reimbursement is required. That payment goes directly to the utility company, not the tenant. You'll also need written permission from the tenant and a copy of the notification letter showing what was paid. That's for record keeping. And next slide, please. For calculating utilities, here is the basic process. Start with the tenant's calculated rent portion, subtract the utility allowance. If it's a positive number, that's what the tenant pays. If it's a negative, it becomes a utility reimbursement. That calculation must be clear and match what is in the documentation. And next, I'm going to pass it along to Stacy to go over the rent calculation steps. Thank you.
Thanks, Marissa. Okay, so we have covered a lot of information today. We've covered all the steps listed here that lead up to determining the actual payment amount for the participant and the project. So hopefully that was all clear. Next slide, please. So kind of to wrap everything up, again, utilizing the rent calculation tool is required, but it also will help in determining the tenant and project portion of unit costs because it will auto sum everything for you. But in summary, the tenant payment portion, also known as the total tenant payment, sometimes you'll hear that term with the Public Housing Authority, the TTP, is really the household monthly adjusted income minus any deductions, and then taking 30% of that total and then subtracting your utility allowance. That'll be how much the tenant or participant is responsible for paying. And then your project payment portion, also known as subsidy payment or HAP, which is a housing assistance payment, is that amount of the cost of rent minus the participants' portion of rent, which would equal your subsidy payment. So again, if you're paying full amount of rent for the client because they're not receiving any income, then it's more straightforward. You're just paying the full amount. If that's the case, you'll also be paying a small portion for the utility allowance. So whatever that excess amount is, like what Marissa was saying, you would just be upfront, either paying the utility company or the participant. So we know that was a lot of information. But as you continue to use this tool, hopefully it'll get a little bit easier. I know a lot of you are already using it, but we're here to support you with that. If you need additional training, just let us know. I think we'll have time right now for questions. We actually have a lot of time. So we did that pretty quickly, but we'll move into any questions that you all have. I think there are a few in the chat that I'm seeing as well. So maybe I'll just read these out first and then we can go to participants if you want to unmute. So
Jody, do you mind? I'm sorry, this is Liana. Do you mind going to slide 19? Just to go back to a question that was asked before about the unemployment.
Sure, just give me a moment.
Thank you.
Liana, what's the heading on the slide?
Calculate household annual income.
I'm going to do it differently. Just bear with me all.
Great, thank you. So there is the fifth line. Says their payments in lieu of earnings such as unemployment, disability, workers' compensation, and severance pay on that slide.
Is this the right slide, Liana?
Yes.
Thank you.
So just wanted to point out that that income is counted and there's a separate line to count that particular unemployment income.
So there is a question in the chat about property management raises the rent per FMR. Are you all able to see that? Stacy, Liana?
Yes, I can see it. I'm reading it right now.
Great.
Understanding it. Property management. So if they are raising the rent as per FMR. So this shouldn't affect necessarily how much the client is paying. So you could do an interim and reflect that the rent was raised, but if their income hasn't changed, they would be paying the same amount. So is that correct? Okay. So yeah, you would want to do an interim, Brenda, if just to reflect that the rent has changed, but their portion necessarily won't change. There's another question in the chat for utility allowance. How is it determined what utility company agency pays for the client? Typically, the allowance was issued to the client to then pay the utilities they needed to cover. So to address the first question, you can still directly give the utility allowance subsidy to the client. Again, this is only if they have an excess, so it should typically apply to the amount of tenant portion. But if there is an excess, you would give them that utility allowance directly. If the client allows or approves of you paying the utility company directly, you can do that. In terms of what utility company, I think that depends on what the client is utilizing. I don't know if you have any other information on that. We don't know. I don't think it's
And the
specific.
landlord would be able to tell you what utility company they use.
And then for the line item, you're talking about if the project is providing the utility allowance, what line item would you use? So you would use, if you are a leasing funded project, you would apply it to leasing. If you're rental assistance funded project, you would apply it to rental assistance. Okay, any other questions coming up for any folks?
Stacy, I did see a couple hands go up
Oh,
earlier.
sorry. Yeah, please. I'm not seeing any hands, so please.
No, I didn't see any hands either. I was just going to suggest that if folks wanted to raise their hand, we do have another about 10, 12 minutes left to continue with any questions.
Oh, now I'm seeing the hands. Okay, Cynthia. Did you have a question? Oh, we have to unmute you. There we go.
I did put a question there. I guess you guys didn't see it. So it says, since we only get money for services, supportive services, would property management, Mercy Property Management have to use these mandatory head forms to calculate rent?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, so we don't have to worry about it.
No, and we also talked about this as well for like HQS forms. They would want to use it, but you don't necessarily have to have those in the file. But as long as you can access them if you were ever to get monitored.
But they don't have to use like the ones you said you have to, this is a mandatory form. They don't have to use that one as long as they're using something similar.
Sorry, yeah, thank you for that. Because for clarification for projects that don't receive any rental assistance or leasing funded dollars, so
Yeah.
you're partnering like cottage
Yes.
housing partners with Mercy or other housing projects, you can use what they have,
Perfect.
as long as it's meeting the regulations. So I'm thinking like HCVs, I know some projects partner with our Shelter Plus Care project. So as long as they have those rent calculation forms in file or in their files, then I think that's sufficient.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure I didn't need to
Yeah.
to watch the recording and get the paperwork. So yeah. Okay.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's a good clarification.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you guys.
Yeah, you're welcome. Does anyone else have any questions? Comments?
Great job.
I just want to add that embedded in the form, there are links to tools like, the student aid calculation. It's complex, as you heard Kadia talk about it. There are lots of exclusions and how to calculate student financial aid inclusions and exclusions. It is much easier if you use the link to the tool and just type in those student financial aid additions and deductions that the student has, and you just then add in the highlighted cell the result of the tool versus figuring it out on your own without using the tool. So feel free to just use the links to those tools that are included in the form.
And then I just want to call out, we did have another question in the chat that we already answered, but it was asked if the rent calculation tool will be provided to subrecipients if there's any updates each year, and I said yes. And also including the utility allowance updates. So if there's any changes to those allowances, because that's included in the tool, we'll update those. So, and if you need access to the portal, let us know because it lives there, the most updated ones.
Oh, you know what I need is the link for the portal. I can never find it.
Okay. I'll send it to you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, does anyone else have questions before we log out? I'm actually gonna put the portal link in the chat so we can have it. Yes, give you access in. Thanks for putting that in the chat, Jody. So if you have any other training related questions, feel free to also email trainings@successforward.org. If they're grants related or project related, email us. The next training coming up is August 19th. We'll be following up on assets and income certification. So make sure to attend that if it applies to you all and forward it to any relevant staff. Thank you for your time and joining us, and we will see you all in a couple weeks.
Thank
Have a
you.
good one.
Thanks, everybody.